Hey guys. So I think a theme I'm really fascinated by right now thematically is just a 90s perspective of the 70s, which, I think so many of the masterpieces of the 90s had. It seems like I just sit down and like it's like so much of a 70s. It's even more than a 60s rehash. It actually turns out I think the film side was more in a 70s rehash. And I'm kind of seeing how, okay, I think I like that perspective of the 90s better. I'm looking at the 70s, not the 60s necessarily. Like it is a difference. I think here it's just a little bit more just like raw and loose in a lot of ways. And I think Richard Linklater was one of the first directors of the 90s to come around and really portray the 70s in this kind of particular way, which is just really going to be a very influential foundation. So it's just this screenplay is perfect from start to finish. And I mean, I first saw this film, man, this is Richard Linklater. It's like that's the thing about him. He naturally, organically, like laid a lot of mystique on me, almost just by nature, like because I saw this film first time I think I was like 13 when I saw this for the first time. I loved it instantly. I thought this is just exactly what I wanted out of the film. Super bad. I think this is exactly because Richard Linklater is entirely concerned about the social side. Like he doesn't ever fall into I think the side of hell for me, which is just like the over the top sexual humor. I mean, this is just always kind of about just literally people who are just kind of getting right out of high school. They're just like, okay, I don't really know what to do with our lives next. And this literally felt perfect. Like, this is like the last night where okay, well, something about that might turn out to be a little memorable in the end. So this is like what it is to just kind of go back to that kind of feeling and spirit in the most anti-nostalgic way possible, where you're not missing it, you're just looking at it organically. But what you might be missing is just the sense of how organically conversations happened in the 70s. I think people hanging out just felt a little bit more looser and inviting and in the moment than perhaps even in the 90s, like in onward, especially now. So, I mean, this makes this film even more important. I think Richard Linklater, whose entire filmography was certainly seen in innocence and just I just like a lot of hippie like characters just hanging out and getting into their own ways. But I think like a lot of people basically describe Richard Linklater films as the film Jaws without the sharks. I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with that in a lot of ways because yeah, it's just because inside of that film Jaws, there's just a lot of characters just hanging out and talking. Basically, Richard Linklater films are just characters hanging out and talking, basically. But it's capturing a time and place that's a time capsule ultimately, and will resonate with anyone I think who lends themselves to it. Because the soundtrack, it's so organic and it's easy to lend yourself to because Richard Linklater is so entertaining, effortlessly entertaining. I mean, this is what the 70s soundtrack gets is like along with like Boogie Nights. I like prefer that Boogie Nights soundtrack slightly as well as Casino because they introduced me to more wide spectrum of music. Well, Disney Fuse is like, okay, this is like the almost borderline. I think Richard Linklater almost it's like almost too far to like the classic rock. I mean, for example, like in School of Rock, Jack Black loves AC/DC. He loves a lot of the bands I love, but in that it's like no, I don't feel that way. But that's just a picture, in a lot of ways. So Richard Linklater's captured. I mean, the guys are obviously Aerosmith in this movie. That's another band. I can't stand them, but you're seeing characters in a moment, and I think this is almost what people in culture were actually like in a sense where okay, this also stinks. I think that's what I always kind of see in this film. It actually stinks more than anything. Being here, like what you might miss is the fact, okay, like I think I should have maybe went out and pursued me a girlfriend. That's what I missed out on, and mentally for myself. So that's the only thing that really is. It's not like I actually want to go back to this time and place literally. It's more like that was a foundation there that comes back and haunts me because there's something there I miss. Basically, if it's just a great song, it's just what it is. Just people hanging out, being in a sociable moment in a lot of ways. Some are happier, some are a little more, like maybe just a little more like low key, maybe like some just hanging out, low key in a lot of ways. Some people are high key, getting crazy. But I think Richard Linklater is just like literally always. And for this film, I think he's out to just comfort you for a lot of the social scene in a lot of ways. Whenever it gets like harmlessly irritating in a lot of ways, but I mean, this is just a film that just rings of just a really original aesthetic. And I mean, I like this personally, like just as much as like any like the best like Wes Anderson film, like Royal Tenenbaums, because this is like a loose but less like just singular kind of perspective. Wes Anderson's like a very singular, which is equally important. I think Richard Linklater is like a looser, which actually I in the end do connect with more. And I think that's where he sees like Martin Scorsese. It's the loose feeling of just you're just hanging out with characters. And I believe all the best directors have is the three elements. It's the music, it's everything about the setting, and it's everything about the characters and the way that they're entertaining. I think when you just combine those three together, you got a pretty much a masterpiece in my eyes. And I think that's what I've seen. That's the secret recipe. It's like the holy trinity, I think, of making a great movie. So that's the gear right there. But yeah, I mean, I love Dazed. This really is just what it is. Just the characters to just really be in the moment. No one's too concerned about the future, which I've always related to that. I don't like overthinking the future because that's hyper anxiety. While thinking about the past too much is hyper depressing. So it's always that middle ground. Just be in the moment, literally, in your own kind of way. But I think that putting into enough of the pressure of the future with the sorrow of the past can just feel funny in the end. So it's like it has to be taken to the balance. I don't know. Basic Abuse is just extremely entertaining and feel good the entire way through, and I think this is Richard Linklater getting a lot warmer after he made Slacker. I love Slacker equally, but I realized that is actually Richard Linklater in an extremely cold-hearted movie. I'm seeing this as the essence. I saw this when I recently rewatched School of Rock. There's like this character that like laughs at Jack Black, calls him a loser. Basically, he literally just reminds me of like he's like, oh, this guy sucks. Like that intense level of criticism in a lot of ways. Just really pins down, I think, the coldness of the atmosphere in a lot of ways. And you can almost say that Richard Linklater maybe had a little bit of that. Because he built himself up all through the 80s, just obsessively with premium film obsession. And then he just exploded with the 90s onward. Just, okay, this is how it is. And I think he needed like a decade to lay the rules of school on himself within film. And that's the thing about film. I think the best film directors realize you're your own teacher, basically, when it comes to it. So, your own kind of way. But Richard Linklater here is just really using music as a way of tapping into a feeling of, maybe almost a sense of like that summer feeling, a summer buzz in a lot of ways. Some characters having an all right time, some having a great time, some having a bad time. But all of it comes together to just a complete experience that's anti-nostalgic. Wow. It's just really looking at everything from a very impersonal lens. Right? So I think I just really like that. But this is the first time he's really cared about the characters. Slacker, he didn't really care. It was more like, okay, everyone's annoying each other. It was slightly in the air, but no one's saying it. It's a little more condescending, but it's more of a character study. It's a lot closer to like what Robert Altman's doing in Nashville. I would say he's very similar to Robert Altman in Slacker. But this film, it's different, a little different from Robert Altman. Robert Altman also had a masterpiece in 1993, Shortcuts, but Dazed and Confused is the other, I think, ultimate masterpiece. Reigns of the Day, I realized too. There's a few others overlooking in this moment, but I think that Dazed and Confused perfectly captures. Again, I didn't even know this is the guy who made School of Rock when I saw this, but I think he's just really capturing, that early 90s perspective on what the 1970s like. This is particularly in 1976. I can imagine this would be a strange time for the youth culture because, I look at like all the art coming out. Really dark, depressing. So the youth culture was just allowed to kind of just feel happy in the moment, hyper, you could say. Because this is a time period where youth culture is getting exposed to organically like a lot of drugs and alcohol. A lot of just intense flirting from characters. I think that's what's different from now. I think that to me is a slight tragedy. I think of the modern internet age. It does kind of rob people of the organic sense of, okay, we need to meet up to do that. Slightly. So now it's like, okay, it is a little bit organically tougher to kind of, open up to people. It feels like once we're together, it feels like, okay, there's just not too much to say. But this is just a film that's really just a comfort place for me because I come back to it about once a year typically, and I feel like it always resonates in the exact same way I think in the purest, cleanest sense, this is what youthful enthusiasm just kind of feels like in the best kind of way. Like even through a part of it is seeing how dumb a lot of it is, but it's like almost genius how it captures stupidity. That's Richard Linklater's subtle, that's his mastery. Like it's so subtle that he just ends up feeling like just a feel-good comedy for everybody, and it's just all the characters are just genuinely perfectly laid out. This film is just kind of what it is to just be completely in the moment rather than always too prepared about the future. That can be a timeless foundation for a lot of people, or too concerned about your past either. It's like neither one of those in the end are necessary. And I think Richard Linklater perfectly portrays why with Dazed and Confused in the past, School of Rock's the past, Boyhood the past, and then the before trilogy is the future. So it's like, I think seeing that middle ground is just perfect in a lot of ways. It's a perfect circle Richard Linklater has made. And I'm looking at old West Side, is it like, okay, like a Holt is built up before an expansion of the right side. And yeah, that's Dazed and Confused. It lays it out perfectly. It's always, I guess you could say when I was younger, it used to tap into a bittersweet mood. Now it's just laugh the entire way. Maybe that makes me kind of cool. This is almost too sweet for me in a sense. But I think I resonate more with Everybody Wants Sometimes. That's more like the college, because where the kids are a little more cold at first, but then they warm up, and it actually is equally a perfect kind of foundation. But I think that one's deeper. So that's like, okay, well, like there's a lot of youthful, energy, but I think everyone else, there's a genuine desire to kind of be mature in that film. On this film, everyone's literally just hazing. So you can say he's more mature than Everybody Wants Some of this approach. The title is about the most listening or making you think it'll be an immature kind of thing, but it's about the most mature presentation of youth culture I've ever seen. Perhaps I love that film dearly as much as I love this film. Just making the moment feel great, hanging out with friends, feeling good in the moment. This is just a certain time period that's unlike any other. I view Dazed and Confused, and it just makes me think perfectly. Um, a definitive time and place. Yeah, I love this film. I really do find it endlessly entertaining. Just as much as like the best like Paul Thomas Anderson and Terrence Malick film of the '90s. And Stanley Kubrick, all the best directors in the '90s. I mean, I realize that sometimes I sit down and actually look at the masterpieces that came out in the '90s. I think I'm like, that is the best decade of film, just like the '70s. I'm like, it's kind of the wrestle between those two decades in a lot of ways because the '90s were literally reviving the '70s. I think in the best way possible. I think when I see the '60s, '90s, into the '60s, I think I see a little bit of cheese. But I think when I look at the '70s, I'm like, okay, being really gritty, but even more so, but still a genius kind of attitude about it. Like what Tarantino had it too. Just all these directors were in tune with something unique in the '90s. So that's Days of Confused. I love this film dearly. I recommend this to everybody.